The RTX 3060 is the third most popular graphics card for gamers, and this card is ranked 98th. The problem is that this card is better than this card, and it's cheaper.
Should I keep going?
Why are you the way that you are?
There's absolutely no catch, and I'm not trying to convince you to go with a super unique or even a used GPU that's been mined on or anything like that. Both of these cards are available every day of the week on places like Amazon and Newegg. Both of them have full driver support for the latest titles, and one of them just has a way better price to performance than the other. And no, my opinion is not swayed by a sponsor or anything, because today's video sponsor actually works with any type of GPU.
Today's video is sponsored by GVG Mall, and you probably already know that I've been using them for so long to activate Windows on a ton of my own builds. They're actually running a huge sale right now, which boosts my normal 18% discount up to 25% off if you use code ZTT18, and I'll have that linked at the top of the description. They not only have Windows keys, but also a ton of other stuff such as Office, and even game keys for platforms like Steam, Origin, and Uplay, and they even have console stuff too, like PSN and Xbox prepaid cards as well. Activating Windows is super simple and only takes like 3 minutes total, so activate Windows today and remove that nasty watermark, and don't forget to use ZTT18 for 25% off.
Alright, so comment down below if you already know where I'm going with this, be honest. But this here is AMD's RX 6650 XT, and it's not the typical comparison that we were first seeing with comparisons to the RTX 3060. We were originally seeing the 3060 versus 6600 XT test, but things have changed over the last several months, and I think the most updated fair comparison should be with the RX 6650 XT. Let's talk about price first. As of mid-2023, when we're producing this video, if you go to PCPartPicker.com and search for RTX 3060 12GB, definitely not talking about the 8GB 3060 with even worse price to performance. If you sort by price, here are the results. As you can see, the cheapest available options right now are the Zotac Gaming Twin Edge OC and the Gigabyte Eagle for $340. There's a PMY version for $350, and then there's even a few options for $360. The RTX 3060 has made itself readily available as of the last year or so, and if you want to spend about $350 on one of them, you have several options to choose from, and you can buy it from pretty much any retailer. Now, all of that can be said for the RX 6650 XT as well, except at a much more affordable price. Again, using PCPartPicker.com, here when you search for the 6650 XT, PC Part Picker isn't even giving enough respect to this GPU, as it's not one of the top options to select from, and to find it, you'll have to select show more and then find it all the way here at the bottom.
Put some respect on my name.
But as you scroll all the way back up and look at the options, here we see an ASRock Challenger model for $260, MSI and two XFX models are available for $270, and then there's quite a few options between $270 and $280 to include pretty nice models such as the Gigabyte Gaming OC and Sapphire Pulse. So just for a heads up comparison, realistically, if you're trying to not overspend on these GPUs, but you don't want the absolute worst model available, an RTX 3060 12GB is going to cost you about $350, and an RX 6650 XT will cost you around $270. The RTX 3060 costs $80 more or 30% more, so in theory, you should get 30% more performance, right?
Nope.
Well, that's not how price to performance works these days, and unfortunately, you just don't see that kind of value anymore. But even at that much more expensive of card, you still should see at least a little bit more performance, right?
I've never been so wrong in my whole life.
And yes, we are going to talk about driver support or AMD driver issues in just a bit. Just relax.
Calm down, just calm down.
Let's jump into the benchmark, shall we? And we'll fire off a few individual games first, and then we'll give you the massive chart for you to analyze. Starting here with games that most people were actually playing and not super GPU test benchy style of games. Here we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and we put the settings at 1080p Ultra, and as you can see, the 6650 XT got 105 FPS, and the RTX 3060 got 84 FPS. And yes, we tested most of these games at about 1080p Ultra to very high settings, and these cards can definitely handle some 1440p gaming, but realistically, most people that are interested in these cards, especially with the data backed by the Steam hardware survey, most of these people are going to be playing in 1080p. Next up, we tested Apex Legends. Again, this isn't a perfect game for GPU testing, but it's still very popular, and in 1080p, the RX 6650 XT got 192 FPS, and the 3060 got 163. After that, we tested GTA 5, which I thought would have returned pretty much the same FPS result because this game is CPU heavy as well, but still we got a similar result as the 6650 XT smokes the 3060 by 40 FPS in 1080p with very high settings. And just to prove that I'm not an AMD fanboy or anything, we did get that anticipated result that I was just describing with Fortnite. Here in 1080p with Pro settings, both these GPUs got pretty much the exact same FPS, and that's because we're currently limited by our CPU and not the GPUs. The testing where we're using today is the same Antec Performance 1 build that I showcased in our top 3 GPUs under $200 video. It's rocking an Intel i5 13600K and 32GB of DDR4 clocked at 3600 MHz. It's definitely not bottlenecking our mid-range GPUs today. Well, except for games like Fortnite in 1080p, but I digress.
Flashback.
Listen to what Sam just requested. This thing costs an obnoxious $150. You'll be seeing some super tactical, ultra quick, no scope 360 snipes in our benchmarking runs from now on, courtesy of Sam and his new mouse.
End of flashback.
Here's the chart that you're mostly looking for. We tested about 20 different titles today, and as you can clearly see, the RX 6650 XT beats the RTX 3060 12GB in pretty much every title, and other than a couple of weird CPU-bound outlier titles, it's not even really a close comparison. Sure, some of these numbers are comparing 700 FPS to 500 FPS, which you obviously wouldn't see a difference, but the results are clear that the RX 6650 XT is definitely the winner in terms of price to performance. But some of you may have already known that, but if you didn't, then you're welcome for shedding the light on how dominant AMD's price to performance has been over the last couple of years.
What I believe you were trying to say is thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But there are some other factors to consider if you're thinking about buying these GPUs. Power consumption is one thing that we can quickly talk about, but honestly, there's not much of a realistic difference that will affect gamers. For an RTX 3060 or 6650 XT build, I personally recommend a tier A or tier B power supply and a minimum of 550 watts, and that's being a bit on the safe side if we're being honest. On average when gaming, the RTX 3060 is rated to draw around 175 watts of power, while the RX 6650 XT consumes right around that at about 180 watts. There's a ton of other factors to consider, but basically they're very similar and require the same level of power supply. A tier C would also be fine with both of these cards in my opinion, but that's up to you obviously. Next up we'll talk about VRAM, and here's where AMD usually makes the most sense compared to Nvidia, but that's actually not the case in this specific situation. As we already mentioned, we're not going to be talking about the stripped down RTX 3060 8GB edition, but rather we're talking about the 12GB 3060, which is what I would consider the normal for 3060s right now. 12GB is actually super solid in terms of VRAM, especially considering how the 3060 Ti and 3070 have 8GB, but the RX 6650 XT only has 8GB as well, which is a slight downgrade compared to the 3060. Now, there is a whole resizable bar conversation that could be had here, but for casual gamers, including myself by the way, the only comparison that you need to know is that the 3060 has 12GB and the 6650 has 8GB. Now, as we just saw, in 1080p, that doesn't appear to be too big of an issue because the 6650 XT is still clearly winning in the benchmarks, but there are some games where VRAM could be a bigger issue. We're starting to see more and more VRAM heavy games such as Halo Infinite, Hogwarts Legacy, and The Last of Us creep up on us, and our testing may have been showing us this as well. In Hogwarts Legacy with 1080p and ultra settings, our 6650 XT only beat the 3060 by 9 FPS, so it's certainly a factor to consider when comparing GPUs, even if you're just gaming in 1080p these days. But then there's also the discussion about GPU uses outside of gaming. There are some certain work situations such as design or AI where the math is simple, more VRAM is just better, but that's not the case for most people, especially for people that are just watching this casual gamer dad right now. Anyway, moving on from VRAM, the next main discussion I want to talk about is drivers, because here's where everyone thinks they're an expert, and I'm going to break it down for you real quickly. As someone who's been consistently daily driving all different types of GPUs from AMD to Nvidia to even Intel for about a decade now, the one thing that I can confidently say about drivers is that all of them have problems, and in terms of gaming, this should not be a factor for you to consider when purchasing your GPUs. About 5 to 7 years ago, there was a very valid and rightful stigma on AMD drivers and how they were always just trash and never ready for the latest titles, but that reality is just so far gone these days, yet the wannabe PC building experts keep repeating it like it's the truth. To be 100% completely honest, I've personally seen way more issues with Nvidia's GeForce Experience managing my drivers compared to AMD's Radeon software suite, but no matter how you look at it, we are always, as PC gamers, gonna run into GPU driver issues. We're never gonna escape that reality. This is one of those things that just comes with the territory. Even console gamers have issues when games first launch, and instead of calling it a driver update, it's just considered an update, so it's not a popular concept for them, even though it's the exact same thing. Now, if there is a driver advantage in some niche application or task that you typically run, then that could certainly be valid. Some applications just work better with Nvidia or AMD, for example, but on a macro level for gamers, I wouldn't recommend using this as an argument at all anymore. Now, there are a couple other little details that compare AMD and Nvidia that I just can't leave out of this video because all those keyboard warriors will go crazy down the comment section, but I'll explain afterwards why I just don't think it's that big of a deal. Technology such as DLSS is certainly a huge advantage right now, and I'm excited to see it improve even more and more in the future, but the same exact thing could be said for AMD's FSR. Same thing goes for ray tracing support as well, but realistically, people that are buying a $250 to $350 GPU aren't going to be turning it on anyway for the most part. FreeSync and G-Sync are also available on so many different monitors these days, days, so that's not really an issue anymore. And things like NVIDIA's broadcaster software are pretty sweet, but at the end of the day, there's just not much that you physically can do with an NVIDIA card that you can't do with an AMD card, again, especially at this mid-range price point. That kind of turned into just an NVIDIA versus AMD rant, so I apologize for that. But the problem and my biggest frustration with it is that everything that I just explained to you can be said all the way up through the scale of graphics cards, all the way up to like the 7900 XTX. For gamers, the RX 6700 XT is a better buy than the 3060 Ti, although it's cheaper. The 6800 is a better buy and cheaper than the 3070, and even the 7900 XTX is a better buy and cheaper than the 4080. This is literally exactly why I sell the Frost Nova on ZTTbuilds.com with an RX 6600 instead of a 3050, and the Deathstrike with the 6650 XT over the 3060. It would just be silly not to. However, at the end of the day, NVIDIA is still completely dominating the market share because of their dominance several years ago. There's not even an AMD GPU in the top 20 for the Steam hardware survey right now. However, if you're about to either buy a mid-range GPU or build a PC for around $800 to $1,000, I would 100% go with the RX 6650 XT. And if you're going to be building any other price range, then I'd strongly urge you to consider all of the options that you have available before making that purchasing decision. And if you got any value out of this video, then number one, hit that like button. That'll be much appreciated. But more importantly, number two, just share this video with one person that you know has that NVIDIA is better over everything type of mentality, because we need to spread this message. And just for the record, I'm 100% not trying to put NVIDIA on blast for this video. Again, there are specific advantages to purchasing the 3060, such as VRAM and maybe a specific piece of software that you're using, but I know I'll catch some heat either way down in the comment section. As we all know, most of the PC building community can be pretty stingy about their budgets, and most people think that price to performance is everything. However, those are usually the same type of people that look the other way when all of the data is just telling them that the better price to performance is indeed on the AMD side. Interesting. And just as a reminder, if you do ever want my one-on-one help with designing or building your next gaming PC, then head on over to zachstechdrift.com/consulting, because I'd love to help you out with that. And hopefully you enjoyed this video no matter which GPU you prefer. And if you want to see my top 3 GPUs under $200 video, then feel free to click the one that's on the screen now.